Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Hobby Cheating live Q&A. So this is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's exactly what it says on the tin. We're going to spend about the next hour together. And if you're watching this live, over in the comments, which is one of these two directions, maybe that way, I don't know. You can ask questions and type them in. I'm watching on another screen. It's actually over here for me. And I'll answer them to the best of my abilities. So the basic goal here is for you to bust out all of your hobby related questions, painting, whatever you've got, working with airbrush, working with brush, a technique, a model, a challenge you've got, any question you have related to the hobby. I am happy to answer those questions as best as I can. If at all possible, I'll show you using the real thing. If you ask me about a product and I have it at hand, I'll do it, all that kind of stuff. So we do this once a month. Right now, that's the schedule. And this is the day. I try to do it in basically the Saturday in the middle of the month. And this is it. So, comments are to my left. Gotta make the L. Okay, that way. Cool. Okay. So Andrew Wade has a question right off the bat, and he said he's got a big one for me. We've been talking about painting, modeling style, and how and if they do change. And so has your personal style changed over the past year or so, and how? Sure. Yes, there are. So one of the things you sort of are blind to when you generally first start the hobby is that there are lots of different roads to the same end. There are lots of different styles. And sort of the deeper you get into it and the more you paint, the more you explore, and the more you look at other artists' work, the more you realize that there's lots of ways to go about that. And none of them are wrong. They're all just whatever suits your particular idiom the best. And finding your voice, as it were, much as with any artist, right? So like if you're a musician, lots of musicians start out their careers sounding a lot like some other artist that inspired them. And then eventually they sort of develop their own voice, as it were. Voice. I think it's much the same thing with miniature painting. I think most of us probably started with the like base coat shade, highlight technique. There's nothing wrong with that technique innately. It's just that tends to be where we start, but that isn't always where we end. We try other styles and find what shapes us and what we like and what aligns with our particular tastes. Has mine changed? Yeah, I would describe my style as Pigden. That is to say, like I really just beg, borrow, and steal from everything that I like. But I would say I've come into use of like brighter colors, the use of my style of damage and weathering and things like that. I like, there's a particular semi-cartoony style, extremely high contrast and bright, clearly drawing from like the French style of the mid 2000s, but as well also like stealing a lot of other stuff from frankly and integrating it in from modern styles. So yeah, that's probably me now. Yes, it's changed, but I mean, it's hard to even be really aware of it yourself because it's like you look at a picture of yourself from 10 years ago and you're like, wow, I looked a lot different. Right. But you're not aware of it on a day-to-day basis. You don't notice the pot boiling. So there you go. Okay. Clecon Wargaming says, if you want to use oil paint over acrylic, is it mandatory to varnish the acrylic beforehand? No, it's a good idea. You stand a lot less chance of screwing up your paint. Oil spirits, mineral spirits, white spirits are fairly destructive to acrylic paint, but not like so much so that they just peel the paint off. So this thing I'm working on in the background, it's funny you should ask that. This thing I'm working on in the background, I was doing a bunch of oil paint weathering on it today. And I didn't put any varnish over it. I just went to town and it's, I didn't hurt any paint or move anything. It means one of the things it does mean is that the oil paint will be much less vibrant because it will soak through into the layers of paint. So it will fade a lot more over time, over the drying period. So in other words, over about the 6 to 7 days it's going to take to get to, something like a dry state. for the thinness of the oil paints we use. They're still not actually, totally dead and dried, but close enough. You'll see the color fade quite a bit as it soaks in, which in this case is helpful because I want very subtle weathering. So I didn't care. Robots. Somebody said, please say robots. I like giant robots. I like saying robots. Robots makes me laugh. Okay. Crazy Horse says, do I only own pink and teal paint? No, I own many others. I just prefer those and use them every chance I get. I love pink and teal. I don't know what to tell you. That's probably part of my style. Andrew, do you have a digital reference? I'll stop shaking the camera. I was shaking my leg there. Do you have a digital reference for non-metallic metal values of different solid figures? Do you mean like something that I look at regularly when I'm trying to figure out how light would play across the surface? Not really. I've sort of internalized it for the most part at this point and kind of think about it directly. Or we'll Google image a particular, real world image of that shape if I can. That being said, Cujo Painting did probably the best breakdown of this by shape ever. I mean, if you just look up Cujo Painting and look up his video on it, he has probably the most exhaustive and well constructed version of this, where he actually shows you in very real time the different shapes, how light would play on them for non-metallic metal reference, and then actually shows you how you combine them together into something like a leg, and then how that's going to manifest. So, yeah, look at that. Acrylic Chemist says, his main question for today's session: I'm painting my Blood Reavers as war boys from Mad Max Fury Road. Cool. Dig it. What wash works well over white flesh? Was thinking blue. None. The short answer. White doesn't take washes. It's not meant to. White turns, like shades, as they are at all times some kind of tint. They are going to tint the color. The brighter the color, the more they will tint the color. And on white, they will by necessity change the color. Washes work best when you have a near mix of it, or something where it's bringing out the natural shadow colors of that thing. White has no such shade in the line. Now, that being said, you're not without hope. So there is still a couple options. Option number one is, and perhaps the most direct, is you take some Nuln oil and you thin it like 50-50 with some kind of medium. I don't care what, Lamia, glazed medium, something like that. And you apply it in a very controlled and careful fashion into the recess. Basically, like, you can wash the whole miniature, but you avoid the very highlights and you push it mainly only into the recesses. And then you're still going to need to do some cleanup work, but it'll get your shadows on. Option number two, the problem with that is it's a little brown. Nuln has brown in it. Option two is you use black ink and really thin the living bejesus out of it. And that'll get you to a similar place. Option three is, like, the problem with blue is there's no blue dark enough. It's not really going to look right. You're going to make ice boys. And the war boys are very, despite their gray, they have a very warm gray to them because they're in the desert in that whole movie. So there's naturally like sand and warm tones around them in the sun, which is yellow. So it turns grays warm. Blue, you're going to make them look like ice boys. Which, I mean, could be cool. It's just probably not what you're going for. The third option is you sort of manually paint in the shadows, right? Instead of trying to wash them over, you start with something darker and just instead of trying to go for a wash and do it all at once, you get in there and do the shadows and then use grays to blend the two together. So there you go. White's always an annoying color to work with. White and black are my least favorite colors to paint in because they are the most annoying colors. All right. Red Wizard, deciding on watercolor. This may be a weird one, but sometimes blue, I assume you mean the color of water, not watercolor paints, but sometimes blue-green water clashes with your minis. Any tips on using other colors, but still making it read as water? Sure, anything will read as water if you color it. It doesn't really matter. Water exists in like 100 different colors in reality. Like if you watch like places where people have crappy water, it comes out gray and yellow. There's brown water, rusty water, orange water from things that get polluted. dark green and seaweedy to bright blue and teal and Caribbean sort of clear and, with a slight teal tinge to it. Like, it's all over the map, man. If you go red, it reads as blood for the most part. But beyond that, you've got a lot of the spectrum to play with here. My best advice is, put waves in it. Like, that's really the simplest answer. Like, after you pour your water, put some kind of wave or churn in it. If it's clear and colored and has some kind of wave, people will tend to read it as water. Like that, your eye just will kind of make that happen. So by the way, for waves, you can use any of like water effects. Vallejo makes some, Woodland Scenics makes some. You can just go to the store and buy like Liquitex, gloss gel, anything like that is how you build up wave patterns into water. All right. Adequate Painting says he got some FW inks at Michael's. Awesome. That's a good investment. They'll last you for the rest of your life, and it's $6 a bottle. That is one of the best deals in the hobby world. Let's see. Have you used the leaf hole punches from Green Stuff World? I haven't. I think they look really cool. It's something I want to play with sometime, but never had call to. I don't like. I did my Sylvaneth army without leaves anywhere, or big leaves anywhere on the bases. I know some people use like birch seeds as well, which I understand are birch seeds look like little tiny baby leaves. But I've never really played with either. Are there going to be hobby cheating videos on this thing behind me? Nope. There are certainly not. There's no way I could film anything to do with that ridiculous thing. Sorry. It's just like there are limitations of what I can reasonably film. I don't have like some kind of professional setup. You know what I mean? I've got my camera and a couple tripods, but this thing is just too big to fit in any universe of camera where it's in focus and I'm doing things that make any sense. I would love to, but that would take some kind of, if somebody hires me a production team, I'll see what I can do. All right. HL17 says, how long you wait before you apply the shade? I had used Mr. Hobby to paint the Curious on my Banshee, and I used my GW Waywatcher green to shade, and it reactivated the hobby paint. I mean, my best advice to you there is don't use those paints if you can avoid it. Like, avoid those kind of hobby or craft store paints. The amount of medium versus pigment and all that stuff in it is just different. They're going to have issues with reactivation. They're going to have issues with coverage. They're going to have issues all over the place because they weren't really tooled for miniatures. Like if you're going to want to use non-miniature paints, then you want to go into like artists acrylics, which is like this stuff. Okay. Because it's actually formulated for this purpose. That being said, if you're going to go that direction and you really are determined to do it, here's a simple solution. Put down your base coats with those craft paints, let it dry for, I don't know, a little while, let's say 15 or 20 or 30 minutes or an hour or something. And then take it out and varnish it. Like, just spray it with Tester's Dull Coat. You can varnish in the middle of steps. It doesn't hurt anything. It's super thin and it would lock it in. Like, you've created a layer separating your shade from your base coat. So it would prevent it from reactivating. So worst case, if that's the only option you've got, if you just can't get your hands on any miniature paints, that's probably a good solution. Vince, do you have an Instagram? Yes, I do. It is under Vincent Venturella. I need to start including it in the description of my videos, but yes, I just added it pretty recently, like in the last week, but yes, I do. Okay. Let's see. Do you ever feel as though you regress in talent on any areas? Sometimes I feel like I used to be better at achieving certain effects than I'm able to do now. No, but that's probably just a nature of the thing. Like, that's not me trying to be a jerk. That's just the nature of I tend to mix techniques and use them quite often and repeatedly. I also tend to make videos about a lot of the techniques that I do. So it forces me to formalize my thinking. I also tend to paint 40 to 60 hours a week every week. So it would be like regression, is a factor of like not doing the thing for an amount of time and allowing a skill to atrophy. Like I played the saxophone for years when I was young. I was that guy. I doubt highly I would be any good at it now, right? Because I've let that regress to basically zero. Whatever neurons in my brain held that information are gone. And I didn't build enough pathways to hold them in place. I'm activating the same resources in my brain often enough here that it would be hard for that to atrophy because there's, I've built lots of pathways to the same thing. My advice, if you find that happening because of, you don't get to paint as much or you find yourself, using oddball techniques, is to keep yourself a little painting journal. I have one here. Okay. And that my wife got me that I won't turn around because it has a naughty word on the front of it. But if I'm writing, if I'm doing something unusual or doing an unusual recipe, I'll write it down so that way I can come back and reference it later. Again, for me, it becomes somewhat easier because often I make a video about something I do that's unusual. So I can always just go reference my own video, which I have done on occasion. So yeah, that's my best advice. There's nothing wrong with it. Let me be very clear about that, to quote my co-host in Warhammer Weekly. That will happen. That can happen. Sure. If you don't do a technique for a while, it's perfectly natural for that to occur. My best advice is if you think you're going to try something you haven't done for a while and you've got questions about achieving it, practice it first. Do it on something that's not the miniature you're trying to work on there. Just do a quick test of it on a piece of plastic card or a throwaway miniature or a Bones mini or something like that, right? So there you go. Hopefully that helps. What is the difference between a wash and an ink? Sure. Crazy Gamer asks that. Sure. So a wash, as generally termed, all these things don't have hard dictionary definitions. This isn't science. Okay. It's not like iron where I can point to like a structure of protons and electrons and say that is iron because it is a wholly definable element. All right. So number one. But as we would commonly use the term, this is a wash. This is a pre-formatted mix of medium, pigment, and basically flow aid, like flow improver, to make things flow into the recesses. Yeah. This is an ink. It is basically medium water and high amounts of pigment, like enhanced pigmentation that's ground extremely fine with lots of medium to make it basically to make it much more intense. This is by nature stronger than this. And this is more versatile in what it can do. Anytime you start more intense, you have more variance to it, right? Like I can't make this more intense. But I can make this I can make this less intense by thinning it, by doing all sorts of things to it. So, like there's nothing wrong with shades. They're a wonderful product. They're one of the few GW products I use regularly. They have a wonderful chemistry to what they've managed to achieve of the proper mix of medium and additives to get them to really flow into recesses and match to their existing color schemes. But they're not inks. Like an ink will have a much stronger effect. Inks are very useful in airbrushing. They're useful for intensifying colors, especially when you're doing glazes or something like that. They're much more useful for doing like painting in a sort of sketch style or anything like that over zenithal because they're simply more intense. Yeah. So there you go. I don't think I said Pestilence was a 3, did I? I thought I said Pestilence was a 2. But I can go back and watch. Anyway. Okay. Andrew says orange water is usually iron rich. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Because it's, red, very thinned out and mixing with sort of yellow light. So it turns orange. Nick Savage. Hi, Vince. I like your ink techniques over a black and white zenithal highlight base. What are some of the more idiot-proof brands or product line to start with if I want to dabble into inks? Oh, great question. Well, doesn't that chain on well to the last answer? Yeah, sure. Go buy the Vallejo gaming set. It's this. It's this right here. It's maybe $20 off Amazon. Comes with like 8 inks. All of them are useful. They're all good colors. They'll cover you for a long time, given the amount I've used. Like, this is the original set I bought And I use inks a lot. And I have killed out the sepia once and the red once. And that's it. And I've been running on that for 3 years now. Given the amount I paint, that's, it'll last you a while. Beyond that, FW, Dollar Rowney, great stuff. Fantastic investment, totally worth it. So that's trying to see what the closest one I have is I can grab. These guys. The Payne's Gray, White, and Sepia are your 3 best investments. They are 3 inks that should absolutely be in your collection. White ink is so useful through an airbrush. It's so useful when doing line work. It's so useful for intensifying and cleaning your white, getting a smooth, even white that doesn't show brush strokes. Sepia is just an excellent shadow color for like any kind of earth or dirt or weathering or natural stuff. And Payne's Gray is one of the best dark blue blacks for doing like non-metallic steel and I don't know, anything like that. Those are excellent. Scale 75 ink tensity. That's a thing I use a lot. I used a lot of it back here. There's a bunch of it on my thing. Intense wood, being, as I've said many times, I know it has a very funny name, but it is sorcery in a bottle. You paint this over a thing that's wood that has been like dry brushed or zenithal or anything like that, and suddenly, ta-da, it's wood. It's just magic. Their black ink is also great for shading metals. Their chestnut ink is wonderful for shading golds, as is their green, and so on and so forth. All of those are probably my go-to inks. There's more, but I mean, that'll keep you busy for a while. Okay. Let's keep going. Oh boy, we got a lot of questions. I need to start answering quicker. HL17, I'm currently working on a ghostly shroud. What would be better for shadow in the deep part? Very light purple or very light blue? Shadow in the deep part of your ghostly shroud. Well, I don't know exactly what your ghosts look like, and that would determine my answer. But in general, if you're talking about the shadow color, darkers are better. So I would say purple. Purple generally makes a pretty great shadow. It's a mix of red and blue, warm shadow, cold shadow. So it tends to be a nice, even shadow color, kind of an all-arounder. And also looks good with sort of ethereal things. What Dollar Rowney inks would you recommend for buying? Well, I answered that. White, Payne's Gray, Sepia. Beyond that, the other colors that get your attention. I'm a huge fan of Red Earth. That's a weird one. I love their Red Earth ink. If you're painting a 40K army that's in any way doing a Martian scheme, where you want like that red Martian Earth, it's a great color. Okay. Okay, HL17 clarified on Mr. Hobby. It's a Japanese brand of hobby miniature modeling paint. Never heard of it. There you go. Neat. You learn something new every day. What's the best method to apply white or whitelist gray, whitish gray? Strongly, don't try to glaze it. Don't try to thin it. Apply it and then glaze down back over the top of it to smooth it out. So when I do my white, if you go to like my simple NMM techniques video, you'll see how I do like a strong white, I glaze a black, and then I do a middle color in there, a mid-tone. That's the easiest way. I actually did this recently for a friend who was painting a Nighthawk army, and I showed how you can like speed paint a whole white to black transition in about 2 minutes. You go for you sort of lay out your zenithal, you darken your black, you intensify your white. If you're not doing zenithal, just paint in your values first, and then you mid-tone the glaze over the middle. Okay. Andrew Wade, question: how do you use flow improver? I have Vallejo and it seems to stop the paint binding to the surface. I know how medium works with pigments, etc., but how about the flow improver? So I use Warcolor's flow improver as well as Liquitex, and I love it. I use it all the time as part of just everything. I'll tell you how I use it. I dip my brush in it, and then I kind of like dab the brush off, and then I go into my paint. That's basically it. So instead of having just water in my brush, like the brush is wet or moist, then I go into the flow improver, dab it, then I go into the paint. It just makes the paint flow. If I'm trying to do like really, really sharp lines, then I actually create a little, mixture somewhere on the wet palette with like bring the paint, bring in a dab of flow improver, circle it around. I've never had a bonding problem with it, so I don't know. That's interesting, Andrew. But like anytime I'm trying to do sharp lines, it's my go-to. Or anytime I just have like a sticky wicky paint. There's like a mirror back there that's on the top of that thing. And when I was doing like, when I wanted to get some scale 75 paints flowing so I could do some wet blending, I used like a drop of retardant and then a drop of flow improver in that same way. So that way I could really smoothly blend them all together in a quick wet blend. So hopefully that helps, man. Pre moistening with flow improver is my short answer, I guess. All right. What scale 75 game color paints would you use to get an old white wood look? The Inktense wood kind of overpowers the lighter colors, at least for me. I paint over top of the Inktense wood. That's the answer. It's never my last step. It's my middle step. So when I want to do old wood, like my entire Sylvaneth army, which has 3 different factions within it, one of whom is old grayed wood. I just dry brushed gray back over the top and then did a shade of Agrax over the top. And suddenly you'll get, because the Agrax is less intense, it'll still tint it slightly brown, but it'll start to go gray. You do that 1 or 2 times, focusing toward the highlights each time, you'll get very gray dead wood. So that's my answer. Red Wizard. All right, Michael Robles. Question: how will Slanesh be released? Could it still be caused by the Necroquake? No idea. But she's coming, and I can't wait. I got it's going to be a lot of work for that, but I look forward to that hobby project more than anything else. Miniatures paintbrush. What's up, Rob? Question for you: any tips on building the Everchosen? I hear that it can have quite a few gaps. It's for next year's Nova. Do you mean Archaon himself? Sure. Yeah, I mean he's not terrible on gaps. He fits together pretty well. But I mean, as usual, I go for plastic putty, which is this stuff, from Vallejo. Or if I've got a there's 3 things I do. One is little rolls of green stuff. So if everybody knows how to make green stuff snakes with your fingers, you take a little piece of green stuff and then you put it on your fingers like this, and you roll your fingers out like that. And you put them back to the middle, then you roll them out like that. This is in my basic green stuff techniques video. And you make little green stuff snakes. And then you can kind of drop them down in the space. You just like lay them into the gap. Then you get that nice wetness there, and you smooth it out, sand it down, and then I put like a coat of varnish over top of it to really smooth it into the thing. Smooth it, sand it, depending on your ability to sand, and then varnish it. And generally you'll have a invisible gap. Plastic putty, if it's a very simple gap, again, just drop it in there. Then you use water to smooth it out, and maybe a light sanding when it's done, with like some 400 or 800 grit sandpaper. But that being said, I didn't have any issues with Archaon, other than I green stuffed over all those dumb exposed skulls and Dorger's flesh, because that's the stupidest thing ever. So I just straight took a file to those, sanded them down, and then green stuffed them. Okay. Do you ever use dry paints? No, never. I see zero purpose to them. I own none of them. I would use none of them. I find them to be the opposite of helpful. I dry brush frequently. I've got no problem with dry brushing. I do it with normal, good old fashioned paint and makeup brushes of all sorts of varying sizes and shapes. Here's a fun one that I used where my dog had gotten a hold of. So I inherited it from my wife, but here's one that I used on this thing behind me. Still good. Matthias, how do you prevent watercolors from smearing? I assume by smearing you mean like showing brushstrokes. I generally will use a little flow improver with it. I tend to use flow improver in my brush in the method I just described, and then just kind of push it out. And I work the paint on the miniature until it's smooth. Like, watercolors requires a very different painting style. It's not a layering style. So again, this goes back to the very beginning of this. When we started, we talked about, people tend to like paint layers. They think I put paint on my brush, I touch the thing, I drag it down, it's now that color. That's not how you use watercolors. You get it in the paint, you have some flow improver probably, and water or whatever. You dab it on there, and then you pull the paint around. until it's smooth. Right. I mean, both the Sigvald the Magnificent and the Shaggoth that I shared this week on Twitter and Instagram and everything, those were done, I would say 80-90% with watercolors. Right. So, I mean, and that's basically what I described is exactly what I did. So there you go. You can also mix other things into them too. Like I frequently will mix. One of my favorite tricks for flesh is I actually take some watercolors, Flesh 2 or Flesh 1, and I do a loaded brush trick where you get Reikland Flesh Shade, which is a really wonderful tone in their shade line. In your brush, it's nice and watery. You get a little teeny tippy dab of the Flesh 1 or Flesh 2. You can only also do this with just straight ivory if you don't have the watercolors. And then I do a flesh blend like that, like you touch and then you load and brush it down, and you get a wonderful transition of a highlight. Okay. Huikan, do you ever travel and hobby? No. Nope. I do not. I travel a lot as well. Maybe not as much as you. I'm on the road generally like 2 weeks out of the month. I just hobby the rest of the time. And when I'm gone, I think about things. The way I hobby when I travel is I look at other people's miniatures and, watch videos and learn, use that time to learn. And I like looking at other people's miniatures and trying to reverse engineer how they did stuff. That's the time I look for inspiration. I look at other people's stuff and really, dial into that element. So there you go. I've been talking for 30 minutes. I'm going to take a little drink. Advice for how to build a Daughters of Cain army. Glue and a hobby knife? No, it's flippant answer. Do you mean like list construction? Yes, email Tom. That's my answer. Go post or connect with Tom on Twitter or something. He just shared 6 different lists with me today. He's your list man. Tom, my co-host from Warhammer Weekly, who's Warhammer Weekly Tom on Twitter. Arthur Marshall, in one of your videos, you mentioned using Pearl X interference gold. Yes. I use that, and I use interference pearl as well. What do I use them for? Snow. I mix them into snow to get the reflective effect. You can mix them into other paint colors if you're going for like a glitter effect on something. So, for example, if you wanted to have a slight glitter or like sort of, it'll literally create a glitter effect in some like magical orb or something that was on a part of a miniature or whatever, like somebody's holding a little magical orb or something. You could mix a tiny bit of it into regular paint. It'll tint it that color, both the gold and the pearl, because they're both pretty neutral. The gold sounds like it wouldn't be neutral, but it's actually a quite white gold. And then you get like, what you'll get is this sort of like slight glitter effect when people turn the magical orb. Kind of a cool thing. And you can still glaze over top of it and preserve it and stuff like that. That's how I use it. It's not a common element, but it's quite useful in there. Snow being an amazingly good use. You just put a little normal powder over top of it so the sparkle's coming from like underneath and has another layer of interference over it. Bullet Bishop Byron, I have too many irons in the fire. Any tips on putting on those horse blinders and work one project to its completion before starting up something else? This is a tough one. I get asked this one quite a bit. And it's tough for me to answer because I've never, the way my brain works is I cannot stop doing something until it is done and to the level that I want it at. That is the nature of me. So like I am relentless when I get a hold of something. Like if you ever watch Cowboy Bebop, like they talk about Jet and his nickname was like the Black Dog or whatever, because once he got a hold of a bone, he wouldn't let it go. That's a lot my personality type. So I don't have the same challenge. Now, that being said, I can sort of rationally think this through and know how I often deal with sort of that kind of thing if it ever comes up, which is I have 2 projects, but never more than 2. And one is simple and one is complex. So, for example, this week I had terrain and I just kept them around. And if I wanted to work on something else or only had a few moments, I would pick up the terrain and do something, a dry brush, a wash, or whatever, because terrain doesn't require a lot of thought. It's a lot of just simple techniques applied. And I use that to fill time and not burn myself out. And then I have my main project I'm spending 90% of my time on. Never more than 2, because beyond 2, your productivity dies. So my answer is challenge yourself, build your endurance muscle. Like, you really have to sit there and say, I will take this to completion and finish it, and then do it again, and then do it again. And after a while, you'll stop noticing the time. When I was painting like 3 years ago, I would have found the idea of sitting down for 100 hours and doing a miniature beyond reason. But I built that up over time, and now like I'll pretty easily spend 100 hours on a miniature. If it's something for competition, that's not like army painting. But that's not something I just did one day. I didn't just turn that switch on. That took just building up that in the same way as anything else. So hopefully that helps. It's a big challenge. I get it. Like it's easy to want to do a different thing. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's, boy, if there's ever the great challenge of human nature. Again, with the which Daler-Rowney inks would you recommend buying? White, Payne's Gray, Sepia. Go back and I explained why a little while ago. Okay. Sorry. Okay. With the Beast of Chaos coming soon, can you do some videos on using the Gorgon, please? You mean painting him? I've been using your black fur video, but I'm not sure it's going to look as good on such a big model. Sure. I have another Gorgon coming. Yeah, I can do some stuff with him. Put another comment in here, Charles, about what you want to see. Like, you're talking about skin, fur? What do you want? Which colors are the best for dry brushing? Any of them, but generally brighter colors. I've dry brushed with any color you can imagine, man. Now, if you make gun to my head, the most common color I dry brush is, it's not in front of me because I just used it back here. Vallejo model color, pale sand. Love it. It's a near white. It's a warm white. It has just enough an off-white tone. It's great. There you go. Gun to my head, that's my pick. Are ink tents from scale 75 not a better product than what? Is that to my previous answer? For the Vallejo game inks are easier to use. They don't have a gloss to them. Like, so if somebody were just starting with inks, that's literally why I would tell them to do it. Yes, I think the Vallejo scale 75 inks are probably better in a broader set of sort of use cases that let you do more interesting techniques, but they require you to really understand how to use inks. Okay. Whereas like the Vallejo set is very user friendly. So if I were just starting with inks, like when you first start riding a bike, you have training wheels on it. You're not going to go run the Tour de France with training wheels. But if you gave somebody like their racing bike as their first bike, they wouldn't have a good time. Okay. How can I make realistic water in different colors? I mean, in big amounts. How do you prepare the base with plastics? How do you do bubbles? Well, there's a lot of questions there. I prepare pre-mixes of them, and then I put them in old pots or bottles. This one's a red one that I have. Right. So I just mix a bunch of it, and then I get it out with a little, one of those things. And then that way I have a uniform color across the army. So if I know I'm going to have a color I want to use across the whole army, I'll just mix a bottle of it. Or just put it into like a normal bottle, and then you can just squeezer it out. Let's see. How do you prepare the base with plastics? Clam pack, gloss varnish the cracks to lock everything in, then put your water over top. Is basically my answer. Like, put down a clam pack piece of plastic and then trim it to form. That way you get a nice, smooth, clear base. How do you do bubbles? Lots of ways. Silica packets, you can order them in bulk from Amazon for a couple bucks. They come with all sorts of little different size bubbles. You make little, if you're ever doing anything with green stuff and you have extra green stuff, just take all your green stuff and roll it into little balls. Like, just little, anybody can roll a ball. You just do that. And then you can knife those balls in half and get little green stuff bubbles. And so if you mix the big bubbles with the little bubbles, you get a nice bubble mix. You get a bubble bobble. There you go. Can I make a list of these magic products? I don't know, man. I've got a lot. I talk about them across a series of videos. I don't even know that I could even like aggregate them all together. Maybe sometime. Maybe that's a future video. Like the weird hobby products that are like you use once in a 6-month period, but they're magic when you use them. Steve Keen. I'm going to finally take the plunge into Vallejo metal colors, but won't be buying all of them. Can you? Yeah, sure. Steel, dark aluminum, silver. There you go. Best paint, best metal paint, period, end of story. Steel, dark aluminum, silver. If you want to go from there, pale burnt metal and exhaust metal, because those both have wonderful brown tones to them. So if I were going to get the next two, those would be my next two. Pale burnt metal is like a highlight with a little brown. Exhaust metal is a shade with a little brown. And they're very nice. You can mix equivalents with inks and stuff into your metal color, but I like them that way. Okay. Gorgon request have been like a shaded base coat. Get a finished look. Okay. So, following on from his Gorgon, he's been shading with inks over his zenithal, but it still looks like a shaded base coat rather than a finished skin tone. Okay, great. So with skin tone, I don't go straight over zenithal. I use purple. I mentioned purple is a nice universal shade color. It's a wonderful shade color for skin because skin has cool blue shadows usually. This shadow under my neck is blue. Okay. Like this is like look at the color. Do you see the coldness to it? The blueness to it, partially because of my 5 o'clock shadow and partially because I'm under like bright sort of blue lights from these fluorescents and stuff. And then it's red because like look here, you see the red in my face? Like your skin has lots of pinks and reds in it. So purple ends up being those two things put together. So when I do skin tone on something like that, I go black and then I do gray and then I do purple up, reverse zenithal. And then I do like a warm ivory from the top. And then you could just put Reikland flesh shade over that and it'll literally look like skin tone. Now, if you want to talk about more, how do I reinforce it? I go in with, things like scale color black leather or like basically deep purple browns and the deep shadows, take some crimsons or something like that and do some light shading in the submuscle strata beneath that, like the low tones, but down from mid, and, highlights with sort of up to warm whites or flesh 1 or flesh 2 from war colors. You just, kind of add on some extras to go to bespoke it from there. But that's my advice. Okay, I painted a Noxious Blightbringer and I'm trying to weather bronze and brass differently. How? Give me more of what you mean on there. Do you mean you want 2 different weatherings for each of them? And you're asking me how I would weather bronze versus how I would weather brass? Or are you asking me versus weathering those 2 things uniformly versus other stuff in the world? So give me more explanation on that E1. I got the Badger Ghost tints. I really love using them, but I don't find many uses for them. Any ideas? Nope. I agree with you. I love them when I use them, but they're not a go-to regular product for me. They would fall into that magic thing. You do them over metals and you do them over zenithals and they're cool. You can have neat effects. Like if you have an army that you want that high contrast sort of metal look to, it really depends on what you're working with. They're great for things like panel modulation, on robots, but I don't use them in any other way other than that. I tend to only use them through the airbrush because out of a regular brush, if you don't mix them with something, they come out like real glossy. So I love realistic weathering, but I tend to lose a lot of the pop on the table with my projects. If you're losing the pop, then I would ask what you mean by realistic weathering. If you mean by realistic weathering, like I tend to really weather the crap out of the whole thing, you're going to do that because you're making it universally brown or something like that. That night was very controlled weathering, right? Like individual streaks and chips and bullet holes and stuff like that. So everything that's bright is still there. Now, if you're talking about you want something more heavy, like you mentioned Nurgle. Okay, cool. So Nurgle, stay away from all over washes and stuff like that. Weather it realistically. That is to say, make the armor seep from the pits that have rust in them, and put verdigris into the areas that are around the rivets but not on the rivets themselves, and have it streak down, and have dark muddy tones but around the feet or stuck into joints or stuff like that where mud has collected and he hasn't bothered to clean it. So like keep it realistic, and that will keep it controlled. That's my basic answer. So like one of my honestly, I've not painted a huge amount of Nurgle, but one of my favorite minis I've ever painted is Nurgle. I painted like that Death Guard leader guy, Death Lord. I don't know what he is. The guy that came in the Dark Imperium box, who's the head of the Nurgle Chaos Space Marines. And that was that. It was a huge exercise in like extremely controlled, quote unquote, realistic weathering, right? Rusting the blade, but not everywhere, because he's swinging and hitting somebody with that thing. And like that impact into other armor is going to shear rust off and expose fresh metal underneath. So there's sharp, bright, poppy edges, but then the back part that he doesn't swing with, that he, doesn't take good care of because he's Nurgle, is all rusted. Okay. Any tips for an elf cold blue skin tone? Sure, Andrew. So yeah, cold skin tones are cool. Puns. You take your normal, basically mid skin tone and literally just mix some blue into it. In general, you want to stick to a. It's better if you use small amounts of a true or dark blue. Don't try to use a sky blue. That's not going to help you. There's too much white in there, and it'll end up desaturating your skin tone. Skin tone is orange. Okay, skin is orange. Like, I'm not trying to make a joke or anything about anything political. Skin is just orange plus white. Orange's complementary color is blue. Right. So you're going to kill it out and desaturate it when you're doing that to some degree. Now the white is going to help prevent that. But the answer is you take a little bit of that, you mix it in and paint the model. It'll turn cold real fast. Use more purple in your shadows, mix a tiny amount of gray into your fleshy highlights, use less pink. There you go. Use more purple shadows. Yeah. And you'll get a cold skin tone. Avi had asked what this thing is, and he asked, is it Playmobil? I don't know, man. You might have a good eye there. Might have a good eye. Chand, I have a question. How do you use Vallejo's paints like liquid gold? I mean, how do you place them on the palette? They're not made in dropper bottles. Very carefully. I pour them very carefully into a little hole in the palette, and then I mix in a couple drops of 91% isopropyl alcohol and stir it up. And then I wipe off the edge and then I reseal it. They are annoying as all get out to work with. This is one of the reasons I tell people they're annoying to work with, because they are annoying to work with. If you enter Mikey R, if you enter a GW painting event, I assume you mean like Golden Demon. I know you got to enter a GW model, but do you also have to have it painted in GW paint? No, and there's no way for them to know that. No, they absolutely not. And people within the like some of the Forge World Studio and stuff like that, they use other paints on occasion too. Their main mixtures are usually GW paints, because they get the heavy metal team can get the paint team to mix their own paints for them. Like they literally have like the paint shop will mix them new paints that they replicate. So like they'll do a mixture and then send it off to the shop that will then make that paint and send it back to them. So that's a neat thing that they have access to. That's how they got Death Guard green. Max told a story about how they mixed a bunch of different greens. Eventually they found one they liked, painted a couple models with it, enjoyed it, and then so took that ratio in that mixture, sent it to the technical team that makes those paints, and they sent back like, here you go, here's Death Guard green. That's kind of cool. Andrew Wade, question on pigments. I have binder medium, but this removes the graininess of the pigment as it mixes. Is there another way to bind it to the surface? Sure. Oh yeah, dude. Tons. I love pigment. I've used just a god awful amount of pigment with that thing. Yeah, so you don't always have to bind it. Depending on how much the model is going to be handled. Like if it's a competition piece, I don't use binder at all for the most part because it's going to sit in a case. But you can just work it in. You can use a slight, like just a very light coat of Tester's Dull Coat over top. Will bind it to place. You can use an ink over top. You can use a drop of medium over it. Just like kind of touch a little bit of medium to it into that area. Yeah, anything like that will bind it in place. You can use alcohol. Alcohol tends to be a nice. If you just put a drop of alcohol into an area of pigment, it'll bind it. And it'll tend to hold the color pretty steady. But I mean, the answer is I don't always bind it. It depends on, again, how much the model is going to be handled. Like, so with that thing, I used a ton of pigment, and then I used some of this, which is Mission Models Transparent. That colors this transparent dust. It's a really interesting color. You can see it's sort of a pinky, warm gray. And it's nearly transparent. Like they're not lying. Like it will shift color slightly, but it's a gray filter. And it's got medium and stuff in it. And it'll bind pigment right to it without changing anything. So I don't know, this is kind of a cool product. I'm playing with these Mission Models things to see how much I like them. So yeah, quite useful. Any experience with or interest in Hero Forge miniatures? No, I have no experience with them. Seems cool being able to make your own minis, but like to have your own minis 3D printed, but I've never used them, have no experience. Okay, Vallejo's not available in your area, but MIG is. Do you ever use it? Yeah, sure. I use some MIG paints. They're acrylic line. They're fine. Nothing wrong with them at all. I like MIG stuff. Thumbs up. That's the answer, I guess. There's not as much like MIG here in the States is much more popular for their enamels and their weathering products and lines. And I use some of that stuff too. But there's nothing wrong with their acrylics. They're perfectly fine. Oh, somebody else mentioned like Pigment Fixer from AK MIG. Yeah, that is a great product. Since that transitioned well. Yes, MIG makes some pigment fixers, which are pretty fantastic. MIG has some of the best versions in the market of a lot of weathering products. So like if you're into like greasy, grimy, weathery, dusty things, all that MIG stuff is pretty wonderful. They have probably the biggest range of it, and it's a lot of fun. Most of my weathering stuff is MIG, Secret Weapon, and Vallejo. So, and then just other concoctions like oil paints. I still use oil paints to weather quite a bit. I want my avatar on the altar to be cold blue marble with a glowing orange yellow OSL from its face and chest. Yep, sounds awesome. What would I paint the guy holding the cauldron? Blue would be my intention. Given the color scheme you've described, he should be the bright blue of the cauldron itself. In general, I have found it's best to align that dude. You're talking about this guy, Mr. Atlas guy holding the cauldron. I found it's best to just align him to the color of the cauldron. He's very hidden. Because like if the cauldron's on the table and you're a human being standing here looking at it, you basically see this. You see like his bald head. His head is a lot like mine. And that's basically all you see. Maybe a little bit of shoulders. It's not the biggest deal, but that's what I would say. The Red Wizard asks Soundwave or Shockwave. Obviously, the answer is Soundwave. Soundwave superior, Constructicons inferior, as we all know. Okay. Let's see. Casually Cataclysmic. Just got done with a 16-hour workday. What is a way to paint decent metallic emerald color? Oh, that's a great question. That's a long day, brother. Man, geez. Okay, so you're tired. So let's get it going here. Yeah, metallic green. I love metallic green. The answer is my favorite metallic green, depending on what you want, is I take a little scale 75 Inktense green and I mix it with my Vallejo metal color directly. That's it. That's pretty much the real deal Holyfield right there. If you have the Metalsmith stuff, They don't have a green ore, but they have a yellow and blue that make a really nice, vibrant green when you put them together. The yellow is like supposed to be for gold, but like it's just yellow ink or whatever. If you put those two together, you get actually a really nice, vibrant green. A little bit of that mixed in, also pretty fantastic. You can also then take the metal, if you want to go the opposite direction instead of mixing it, you can take the metal and go for like the Forge World style to do like a zenithal of your metal and then just lay that green over top, like with an airbrush or something. If you're brush painting it, you got to be real careful with it. Okay. Can you make a tutorial for glazing from pure white to gray? Pure white to gray. I assume you, Powell, give me some more information there. Do you mean like taking a white down to a gray, like glazing over white? If that's what you're asking for, a video on glazing white, that's a great idea. And yes, I can certainly do that. Kate Brush, not really a question, but I found you harsh on Army Painter metallics. Yes, I am, because all metal paints are garbage compared to Vallejo metal color. Like, I understand that's neat that they have kind of small pigments. Like, I have a pretty hard opinion on this one. In general, if you've heard me talk, like I said, with most paints, I don't care. Use whatever you like. It's fine. I use like 5 different brands of matte paint at any given point in time. My table back there is just, it's like Scale 75 and Vallejo and Citadel and Reaper and what else is over here? MiG, and there's emission models on there. Like, I mean, it's all there's a secret weapon thing on there. Like, I'm all over the shop on most paints. I don't care. Whatever you like works. But like, seriously, once you use Vallejo metal color, there is nothing else like it. It is a singularly unique paint on the market right now. The Metalsmith is probably the closest thing. It flows, it wet blends, it covers, it glazes. It is sorcery in a bottle. And it dries and looks like real metal. It has the shine of real metal, not that dull nonsense that most metal paints have. There you go. That's my rant for today. I like, again, I'm not gonna like, if you like it and you're using it and you don't hate it, cool. Like, that's fine. Make yourself happy. If you're happy with the look, then all good. But I mean, really, for my personal taste, I just it's a sour taste for anything but Vallejo metal color. Okay. Is there any chance to see a video on how you do the night haunt unit I talked about before? Yeah, I do want to make some ghost videos. It's been a thing that's kind of been floating in the background. I haven't got a chance to do, but it'll be coming. The former, weather bronze, so it doesn't look like brass and vice versa. Yeah, so I mean, bronze and copper both weather quite similarly in that they have verdigris elements to them as they oxidize. But they can also turn like bronze also can have blue elements to it. It can have black elements to it. The answer is when you weather it, like I use for bronze, just what I did here on these doors. Oh, I just covered them. Sorry, on the gates. I used a little verdigris, but I also used some sepia black ink and got that down in the cracks. So I made a mix of sepia and black ink and then thinned it out and then put that in the cracks. Bronze can also tend to get some like black kind of spots to it, so that reads as realistic. And then verdigris over top of that in some very careful choice places. And I think that can be basically a way to go. Oh, that's pretty funny. Did I ever try? Somebody asked, did I ever try Mission Models paints? Yep. Trying them right now. I just talked about that. Yeah, there'll be a review sometime. I want to use enough of them. I've only really tried 2 in the line and so far. And I like both of those, but I'm playing with more. Charles says, what can you do to make your black fur look more finished? Vary its highlight. So take it like gray, black ink, and then when you dry brush, don't dry brush the whole thing. Imagine this is the back of the monster with the fur. Gray, black wash, and then light touch of some gray. And then as you get toward the center, draw a hotter highlight with your dry brushing into the middle. Like dry brush the whole thing, then only this much, then this much, then this much. And getting brighter the whole time. That's my answer. Okay. Vince, I still have problems with true gold clumping on brushes. Specific brushes you use. Do you mean Vallejo liquid gold? Is that what you mean? I use isopropyl alcohol to thin it out. That stops that from happening, if that's what you're asking me. Do you ever do speed painting competitions? No, I don't. I've never participated in one. I'll probably do the Gen Con one next year, but I don't know. And the I like it. I speed paint sometimes myself just to challenge myself. It's a lot of fun. No problem. Like, so I just challenge myself sometimes to say, okay, I'll do this in 2 hours. Yeah. Would you do the reverse purple zenithal highlight on the cold blue elf skin tone? Yeah, probably. It feels good. Like that. Like blue is a good undershade, or sorry, purple is a good deep shade for blue skin. Rob, I'm not sure I want that responsibility. That's you know what question I answered there. How do you decide whether to do NMM or TMM on a project? Whatever takes my fancy is the short answer. Generally, if I'm doing army painting, it's always TMM because I like TMM looks better across a broad sweep of an army and in uneven lighting where we play. But I often mix them. Like people are like, well, you can't mix the two together. Yeah, you can. I promise you can. It's just paint. You can apply it however you want. If you look at my Marathi, that has a mix of non-metallic and true metallic on it. You know, and I think she looks pretty good. I don't think there's anything wrong with her. You know, she meddled pretty strongly at Nova. I feel good about her. You know, so I think that's as much validation that you can combine those things all you want. So I just kind of go with what I like. Okay. I gotta start drawing this to a close. We're at our hour. So I'll answer a few more and then we'll go from there. Okay. What tools do you use for cleaning up models, i.e. getting rid of mold lines? That's a great question. We start with, of course, our standard knife. I use a scalpel blade. Like this is a scalpel holder. And I buy medical grade X-Acto blades. Like I buy medical scalpels. You can buy them from medical supply in like lots of 1,000 for cheap as dirt. They are razor sharp because they're meant to cut flesh. Do be careful with these, super careful with these, because if you skip this into your thumb, it will go through. I mean, if that happens, best advice, get some of that blood out and get it into like a bottle. So that way you can mix a little medium with it later and boom, you've got some great red pigment, but be careful with those. Then from there, we have this thing, which I use sometimes, which is a mold line scraper. You can see it has a little flat side and a little angled side. That can be very useful. We have sandpaper. So I keep a couple different kinds of sanding sticks and sandpaper, including just 400 and 800 grit sandpaper for getting things super smooth. Yeah, that's all that stuff is my basic tactics. And then if I absolutely can't get rid of it still, a little bit of gloss varnish over the top. Yeah, so Kate asks about painting tires for the upcoming Speed Freaks. There will be a tutorial on tires. Somebody shot this at me. Might have been you, Kate. I apologize. I'm going to do a tutorial on painting tires because rubber has a very unique set of characteristics and colors to it. And there are great tools out there to do it. So I'm going to actually do, I probably won't buy the Speed Freaks game, but fortunately I have a buddy who you know, has a 40K orc army that sits at my house and that is relatively unpainted because it's from a long time ago, and he loves buggies. He has a ton of them. So I have all the examples in the world. Okay. Ice Axe Miniatures, man, that's awesome. Dude, I'm glad I was able to help, and congratulations on that placement, your first competition, man. That's wonderful. Good. See, that's just it. You gotta lose that fear, man. There's nothing to do but learn, and you'll feel so much better afterwards. That is really great. Congratulations, man. That's wonderful. From white to gray, any hints before a tutorial? Yes, feather void blending. Take a relatively thin version of the color. So this is, glazing white. So you start, let's imagine this is the shoulder pad. So this is all white. Take a relatively thin, not like super thin, but thinnish, play with it. You'll get the idea. Version of the color, place a line of it down here. A little retardant medium can help. Void the brush, wet this area, go down into the paint, and then draw it back up. Clean the brush, feather it out. It's the best way to do it. That's what I'll show in the video. All right. Best way to turn scale 75 paints into airbrush paints. Just tons of flow improver. I just use straight Vallejo airbrush thinner and water, like this stuff. God, this bottle is old, but there it is. This bottle's been with me through many bigger bottles that have refilled into this. I just use that. Like, I use a heavy amount of it. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you drown the stuff. And then I do it in the cup. And then, so that, a couple drops of water, I have an old crappy brush. I mix it in there, you know, backfill it to see how it's bubbling, and then go. Never had a problem. Never sure what synthetic brushes to buy for metallics. I literally just buy. So Kevin Kintaro said about liquid gold, what synthetic brushes to use for it. I literally just buy bulk packs of them from Amazon, man. It's the isopropyl alcohol is the key. You got to keep that stuff thin and flowing. What is your Taiba or Tebow? I think I said that right, Tebow. It comes up all the time in PMP, and I'm still bad at it. I'm terrible with names. I'm very sorry. What is your go-to gold paint when doing army speed painting and you don't want to bother with liquid gold? I use Vallejo metal color. It's always just their gold and copper, and I mix them in different ratios and then pull the silver in. It's what I use for almost everything. You can generally get a good range from coppery bronze to pure gold, and I just mix them with inks. That's the answer. I wish the range was bigger too. It's a beautiful, easy to use paint with a highly restrictive set of colors. You've got to do work to get it into to mix, but I still love it. Where did I buy the mold line scraper? Amazon, I think. Something like that. I literally just searched up mold line scraper one day. Somebody mentioned one, so I went to Amazon and searched it out. A couple bucks. How many armies have you painted at the same time? One. I never work on more than one army at a time, period. An army gets started and it goes to completion. Now, I'll come back to it and add to it later, but I set a mark for what completion looks like. 1,500 points, 2,000 points, this number of models, whatever it happens to be, I don't care. A skirmish force, a path to glory force. But that is it. Like that, you start that, you finish that, period. If there is another project, you don't do it. If they're of that size, you don't do it. If there's a new cool army, too bad. It will still be there in a year. You wait. Don't eat the cookie. Wait for 5 minutes, and then you get 2 cookies. Yeah, I mean, that's what I do. And the key there is to set some kind of goal, to set a finish line. Don't just say, I'm going to amorphously paint this army. Say, I'm going to get these units done, and then make that your finish line. And once you're done, then free yourself up to do other stuff. And leave the rest of it to come back to later. So I did this with my daughters, right? There was a point I wanted to get to, and I still have a couple daughters units, and I'll paint them in the future when I get bored. The way I'll occasionally add models to old army. And then I rotate in between army painting. I rotate in those older models where I'm doing a single model for that army. So I'm painting the daughters start to finish or whatever. But my second project is I'll add a model to Slanesh, and then I'll add a model to a Beastman army and something like that. And that keeps it fresh. It keeps it so I'm not just relentlessly beating the drum and dying, right? That's my technique. That's how I found success. Your mileage may vary. That's a highly personal thing, admittedly. If you were asking how many armies I have painted, I've painted 11 armies. If you say what's a full army, I mean, I have my giant army right there, but I have 10 giants, but I don't think they count. All right. Rusting non-metallic metal. Any tips? That probably deserves a whole video, but yeah, work brown tones into your metal throughout the non-metallic metal process. Tint the whole metal to brown, and then paint your damage over the top of it and rust in the same way you would otherwise. like if it was true metal. If you like Google image search on like or not Google image search, but like go on Putty and Paint and look at that. There's a lot of people who do great weathering of non-metallic metal, but the real key is to set yourself up for success by working brown tones into your non-metallic scheme. That way, it feels appropriate to have the weathering on top of it. If you try to go from just like stock, clean, sort of blue, gray, white NMM, it's going to feel weird when it's something that's rusted. So you have to set your values initially. All right, so I'm going to scroll down here to the end. I'll take like 2 more questions. How did I post a video 6 minutes ago? Because YouTube has a scheduling function. That's one question. Sorry. Is it better to paint every day or paint when you have a good mood for non-professional painters? What a wonderful question. I'm actually going to end on that because, well, I'll answer one other thing first. Do you use Vallejo metal color with a brush or airbrush? Yes, it works fine with both. Okay. And then do I have a concept of a color palette for my Slanesh army? Yes, I do. The tests that I've done recently with Sigvald and with my Exalted Chariot are that. And it's adding that shock electric blue into my purple, magenta, pink scheme. Okay. Now, let's see. Is it better to paint every day or paint when you have a good mood for non-professional painters? What a great question. And this is a wonderful one to end on because this is sort of theory and philosophy. It is better to paint every day, but it is better to work on the things that really matter when you're in a good mood. And what I mean by that is if you want to paint a lot, it's good to make painting a habit and part of your life. If you want to work out and get in shape, you need to work out regularly or whatever, but that doesn't mean you do the most intense things every day. Some days you're going to go to the gym pumped, and some days you're going to go to the gym out of a sense of obligation. So when you go to the gym with a sense of obligation, get it done. Just get it done. When you're pumped, do the stretch. That's when you stretch your legs. So my answer is yes, it's good to paint every day. Try to sit down, do something, hobby in some way, but don't stress yourself over it. Because when you turn that thing from just trying to indoctrinate hobbies into a source of stress, you're naturally working against what the whole point of this thing is supposed to be, which is to relax and be an artistic and creative output. So on those days where you're not necessarily in a good mood or whatever, do something fun and light. Pick a piece of terrain, dry brush the crap out of it, weather it, make mud, just play with rusted metal, play with things you can use like stab and dab stippling techniques on. You can feel like, God, stress, hate you, stupid, rusted, dumb hunk of junk. And, it's fun. You're not painting for any kind of competition or to a high level. You can just mess around and it'll be a great stress reliever, but you're still painting. You're still learning something. And then on those days when you're in a good mood, push yourself. That's when you try new techniques. You work your deliberate practice. You stretch your legs to see and reach into new spaces. Right. And in that way, you're always learning and you're always indoctrinating yourself and making it a part of your routine and growing as a painter and a hobbyist. But you're not making that a stressful part of your day. You're making that the outlet it's meant to be. So that's my best advice. Hopefully that's helpful. That's how I think about it. And that's why I keep 2 projects. So if I am in a bad mood, I can flip to the other low stress project. There you go. Okay. So there you go. That is all. That is all we've got time for today. But I appreciate it. We went a little long, but that's okay. I'm glad we had so many wonderful questions. I hope this was super helpful to everybody. I hope this gave people some good ideas. If you're watching this later or you have some more questions, feel free to drop them in the comments once this posts. I will go back and answer all the questions that come up in the comments as best I can. So feel free to post there if I missed your question or if you want more clarification or if you're watching this later. We do this once a month. I usually try to do them about in the middle of the month. I announce them on Twitter. So if you want to see when this is coming, follow me there. My Twitter is down in the description of this video. But there you go. I hope it was helpful. Thank you to everybody who watched. Thank you to everybody who asked questions. I really appreciate it. And I hope this is helpful. And I hope we can all take our next step on our hobby journey together. Obviously, it's something I'm very passionate about and I love. And it really thrills me to be able to share any advice to people that I can. So thank you very much. And as always, we'll see you next time.